It's our mission, for those of you who do not know us, it is our mission to foster a community of like-minded individuals, inspire success and empower action. So we really want people to take away as much as they can from our sessions and implement what they learn into their own lives and build positive results. So you can find us at CWHO.ca. We specialize in real estate investment education. We have podcasts, videos, calculators, documents that you can use for deals. We also run some courses and some programs, which we'll talk about in a second here. So this is our 2021 associate program that is underway right now. The picture that you can see on screen was the program that we ran last year, which Amanda, who you can see on screen there, was a part of. That was the property we purchased down in Lethbridge, Alberta, as a group, as a team. So this program is really designed to help people learn how to do joint venture real estate by actually doing joint venture real estate. It's almost forced learning, if you will. So the program for 2021 is currently closed. We're halfway through. Our team this year is actually going to be presenting to the group in the start of August. And we're excited to see what investment opportunities they bring to the table. And we can't wait to buy another property with the group. We also have a presentation from Phil Wong. For those of you who don't know Phil Wong, he is the president of Commonwealth Home Ownership. Phil's going to be talking a little bit tonight about new build versus turnkey real estate investments. Phil.
Hey.
I believe you're up, buddy.
Yeah. So welcome, everyone. I know it's a hot day, so thanks for joining us, sitting wherever you're sitting. I know I'm slowly melting here, but yeah, today I'd like to talk a little bit about new builds as a real estate investment tactic. So I know that traditionally you don't really think of new builds as a real estate investment tactic. Typically, when you think of new builds, you think of these guys, right? Or when you think of real estate investing, you think of these guys. You know, HGTV, just like Amanda said, you know, knock down the walls, make it look pretty. You know, make a lot of money, they make it look easy. That's the thing. But so typically you're thinking of taking an old house, renewing it, and then doing this little before and after thing, make it look great, and then you can take that and buy an existing home, rent it out, add a secondary suite, short-term rentals, and you can basically just take an old home, make it new, and then you can sell it, make a lot of money, or rent it out and make a lot of money. So, and then other terms that come to mind are these things: buying an existing home, renting it out, adding a secondary suite, adding a garage suite, a garden suite, and renting that out in addition to your basement or your primary home, or using that as supplementary income. Short-term rentals, Airbnbs. I know a lot of people have made a lot of money. Vacation rentals, those things. And lastly, wholesaling, rent-to-owns agreements for sales. These ones all have a little bit of romanticism to real estate investing, just because you hear people making a lot of money or doing very well doing these strategies and tactics. But really, when it comes down to it, it's just a lot of hard work and hustling. Okay, if you're doing renovations, you could run into budget overages very often, especially now with construction prices and material prices being through the roof. You're constantly dealing with property issues as a landlord. Whether it's maintenance issues or tenant issues, and then you're constantly managing the tenants' expectations. If what you want and what they expect don't match, you're going to run into issues. So I want to talk about new builds as rentals, just because this kind of defies the paradigm a little bit in terms of how you look at rentals and what you have to deal with rentals. So I mean, it's still work. Don't get me wrong. It's still a lot of work with regards to having to manage the build and still getting it rented and maybe managing a little bit of stuff after a new build. Typically the landscaping and stuff like that isn't done. So still work, but it's not as much work as having an older house typically. It takes away a lot of the uncertainty associated with some of the other tactics, because you know exactly what you're getting as an end product. And you have a pretty good idea, if you've done your research right, the type of rents that you should be getting. Can have it built exactly to your specifications as a rental. So you have your secondary entrances, your exit windows, your 2 furnaces, a little lobby where both tenants can access the mechanical room. Those little things, they're small, but they're important, and they make your life a lot easier. You can separate the upstairs and downstairs tenants access as much as possible, so they, in a best case scenario, they don't even see each other, which is what you want. And much fewer surprises. You have a new build, everything should be relatively running smoothly as possible, as far as a house goes. So your numbers should be more reliable when you, as well as far as the pro forma goes, just because you're not running into unexpected costs and run-ups as the project goes on. And typically attracts better quality tenants because it is a new build. You can price it a little bit higher. You can be so then you can basically weed out a lot of the people who don't want to pay as much for a rental, and you typically end up with higher income tenants, which are typically better quality. So when you hear about real estate investing, I know on podcasts, books, there's a lot of rules that go with real estate investing. And so you might have heard the 1% rule, right? This is popularized through Bigger Pockets. We'll go over each of these a little bit more. The 8% cash flow rule you might have heard of. The walk score rule, basing the property you buy based on how good the walk score is. And the transit station rule, being within a reasonable distance to a train station to maximize your rents and your resale value. So first of all, let's go over each of these in a little bit more detail. So the 1% rule, so made popular by Bigger Pockets. It's a very popular US real estate podcast. And what it states is the monthly rental revenue of a property should be 1% or more of the cost of the property. So let's go over that. Let's use an example. So the property cost, say, is $200,000. Based on this rule, your rent should be $2,000 a month. Okay. It's not the most practical rule to follow in Canada. The US has a lot of more variable properties, a lot of lower cost properties. They have higher densities, a lot of lower cost properties, and you can rent them for a lot more than you typically can in Canada. So you may be able to find properties that fit this rule in less desirable neighborhoods or in smaller municipalities. I personally, or Brad and I partnered on a project in Amanda. We actually have a property that actually fits this rule based through the associate program. We actually got the 1% rule. And we bought a place for $235,000, renting it for $23.50 a month, which is amazing. But again, it's more of and the thing is, it is in the smaller municipality, and it is not in the most desirable neighborhood, but it does very well, right? And we found great tenants, and it's doing very well. But just keep in mind, this is take this with a grain of salt. Another thing you may have heard is the 8% cash flow rule. This one is something that Rain has talked about. So basically a metric to maximize the chance that you'll have positive cash flow in your rental property. And it's similar to the 1% rule in that it does compare your rent to your property cost. But what it does is it takes your yearly rent versus the property cost. And the example I have here is $2,500 rent on a $400,000 home, which is quite good for the most part. And it's only a 7.5%. So again, it's hard. It's hard to get the 8% rule sometimes, and it's more applicable, but it is more applicable to the Canadian real estate than the 1% rule. This is easier to get. I do have a few properties that do hit this number, but there's a lot of factors that also go into whether or not this rule actually, how valid this rule is. Still take it with a grain of salt. If you have low interest rates, low taxes for whatever reason, low overhead costs, you're managing yourself. The 7% rule is not, the 8% rule is not a make or break. And you may have heard the walk score. So if you go to walkscore.com, what they do is they actually rate your location of your property and give it a score from 1 to 100. So higher is better. The higher the walk score means you have the place is more walkable. So it considers the proximity to restaurants, cafes, libraries, other amenities, and how easily you can walk from your location to those amenities. So it tends to favor older or higher density locations. And the problem is it doesn't always make good rentals, because typically you're looking at older areas, higher density areas. So you're looking at typically A, either more expensive areas, B, either older areas that might need a lot of work, or C, you're looking at condos. And those three categories of properties might not be the best as an investment property. It might be a great place to live, or a great place to Airbnb, or for short-term rentals. But for long-term cash flowing buy and hold rentals, it may not be the best option. And lastly, we have the transit station rule. So it states that if you want to have a rental within 800 meters of an LRT station. And so research has shown that it has improved rent and sale prices by as much as 15% if you're within walkable distance. However, there's a little caveat: you don't want to be too close to a train station either. Noise may be an issue, crime may be an issue, and it's generally a good rule to follow if you can find a property that fits your criteria. But it's not a make or break. So thing with guidelines, and so these rules are just guidelines. So they give you a good place to start, but they're not always the best place. But do not take them as dogma, and they should ultimately be guided by your personal preferences. We'll go over that in a little bit. Yeah, they should never be considered in isolation. You should always consider all the other factors, whether the type of tenants you want, the location that you want to deal with, the type of how old the property is, the type of property that you want. And the thing with new builds, and the reason I went over these rules is that the new builds breaks all of them. It doesn't follow any of these rules. So I was actually very skeptical when I started doing new builds as an investment tactic, just because I wasn't sure whether it would hold up. But through trial and error and some testing, I've shown that it has worked. So I'll go over that in a bit more detail as well. So first of all, as an investor, you want to ask what your preferences are when you're doing real estate investing. So first of all, why do you want to do real estate investing? Is it even something you want to deal with? Is tenants, is property management, is all that stuff you want to deal with and okay with dealing with? So, and next question is, what do I want to deal with? What type of properties do you want to deal with? How much work do you want to put up with? Right? Who do you want to deal with? What type of tenants do you want to interact with? What type of tenant profile do you want? And what type of tenant profile do you not want to interact with? And how much time do you have to deal with your issues? How much time do you have to deal with property management, tenant phone calls, broken down appliances, those kind of things? How much time do you have on your plate to deal with those issues? And all those factor in. So for myself, I don't want to deal with a lot. I want to deal with good tenants that make good money, that can pay my rent on a monthly basis. And I don't have a lot of time. So that also pushed me towards this new build as an investment tactic. So none of those rules fit. So then I needed to come up with my own kind of criteria for vetting what makes a good property for myself. So I came up with a $150 rule. So it states that there has to be at least $150 of cash flow after allowing for property management, maintenance, and vacancies. So typically the numbers I put for those are property management, I give myself 10%, maintenance 3 to 5%, typically on the 3 to 4% range if it's a new build, vacancy 5 to 8%, depending on whether it is a single detached, non-suited, or suited home. If it's a non-suited, I would go for 8%. That's typically 1 month of vacancy a year. 5% of it is a suited house, typically because you don't have both suites vacant at the same time, so you have a little bit of leeway. So I know $150 may not sound like much. When we add back the soft cost, which is the maintenance and the vacancy, it starts to look a lot better. And a good number to consider, and it's a good number to consider buying, where you're not also passing up good deals, right? It's not always a home run, but it might just be good enough. But just because you got to remember, it's time in the market that matters. It's not timing the market, it's time in the market. So the sooner you can get a good investment property, the more time you have to generate wealth with that property.
And Phil, just to clarify on that slide, so the 10%, the 3 to 5%, and the 5 to 8%, they're all percentages of the gross rental income.
Yes, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah, they're allowances, and when we say allowances, and Phil used the term soft costs, it's because you can choose to do your own property management. So when you're working through this rule, this $150 rule, the intent is that you're allowing for essentially what we would call worst case scenario. And if you still are going to generate $150 in cash flow, well, that's going to put you in a really good position if you decide to do your own property management per se. That's going to dramatically increase your cash flow.
Yeah, we'll go over that a little bit more in detail later too. Thanks, Brad. So yeah, let's go over an example quickly, just for about that rule. So you have a property that rents at $2,500 in cash flows. I would say conservatively $250 a month. It's not much, right? It doesn't seem like much. But then if you take that $2,500 a month and you parse that out into your various costs, your property management $250, maintenance $100, vacancy $125. Assuming you're hiring a property manager for 10%, you're still getting $475 of cash flow a month, which will go into your reserve until you build up enough of a reserve, and then that can become take-home income after your reserve is at a healthy level. However, if you decide to manage the property yourself, then now the math is looking very good. You add that back to that $250, now you're at $725 a month of cash flow. So from $250, you can go up to $725 if you decide to manage it yourself. Which is why that $150, even if you take off $100, you're still $625 a month, which is nothing to balk at. It's still a decent number. So in terms of if you want to get into new builds, we'll go over the pros and cons of new builds in a little bit too, but in terms of where to start with new builds, start having conversations with builders. The best way I find is just to go to some show homes. Typically you have a lot of, a row of show homes on a block, so you can talk to every builder on that block and see what they have to offer. So typically they don't, if you're not on their mailing list, you don't really hear much about them, right? Like a realtor, you won't hear much about them from realtors. They're typically kind of market to their own people. They typically target only first-time home buyers. So they're kind of not on the radar a lot of times for a lot of investors. So just have a chat, see what they have to offer. Go to show homes, check out their build quality, their products, their floor plans. Ensure the demographic of the neighborhood they're building and matches your tenant profile. So for me, I typically like to target young professionals. So I typically look at the higher, more affluent neighborhoods and see what areas they have and what pricing they have, whether it matches the cash flow and whether it matches my metrics. And ensure the neighborhood they're building in is zoned for secondary suites. So I can't emphasize this enough. Depending on the neighborhood, depending on the municipality, not all land is zoned for secondary suites. Calgary, for example, I find is very stingy with their zoning for secondary suites. Lethbridge also quite stingy. In a neighborhood, on a block, they might only allow 2, 3, 4 on a suites. Maybe 20% of all their land might be for secondary suites. Whereas in Edmonton, as long as the plot of land is big enough and the kind of the floor plan of the house allows it, you can build a secondary suite on any plot as long as it matches, as long as it fits the parking and secondary suite criteria for building codes. So important to look at the municipality and whether it's zoned, because if it's not zoned, you're building a house, it's great, but if you don't have that secondary suite, it can be hard to cash flow. So this is an example that I have in Edmonton that I built. This new build in a new neighborhood, about 1,300 square feet. Nothing great, but it's new. It looks good. It looks really good when you're in the photos, and it shows really well. So it makes it's actually quite easy to rent. Something like this actually cash flow about $900 a month, and despite that, it doesn't meet any of the criteria for the first 4 rules. Right? The only one it matches is the $150 rule. In this case, a little bit better than that that I set up, but it is still rented very, very well. So pros of new builds: great returns. Some of them may not look as good on paper, but they're still really, really good returns. Preferred tenant profile. It is easy to rent. Few maintenance issues. The home is still under warranty for delivery systems for the first 2 years, the building for the first 5 years, and then structurals for 10 years. So if there's any issues within the first 2 years, you're typically covered. So not a lot of costs. Ready to rent from day one. So you don't have nothing to fix, nothing to prepare. Purpose built as an income property, so everything you want is already set up. So there's very few issues with tenant interactions, very few issues with soundproofing, for example. As long as you soundproof it well, you can have that done from day one. No realtor fees. Sorry, Amanda, I know, but that is a benefit. No bidding wars. This is huge, especially in a hot market. And if you can go to a builder and you can put a deposit on a piece of on a plot for $1,000, that is yours. That is yours until your deal falls through. So then they can and no matter what you can pick, and then now you have your time to pick the type of property you want, price that you want, negotiate with a builder, and you don't have to worry about other people trying to scoop your deal. And you can price rents a little bit higher than the competition, just because it is a newer product, and you can, depending on your finishing, I typically have higher end finishes, so I can typically price my property a little bit higher than the competition who have lower end finishes. There are downsides though. So like anything, first of all, it breaks all the rules. So it can be a little bit nerve-wracking at first because you don't know whether it'll work. It does. It doesn't look as good on paper. So when you're presenting this deal to a joint venture partner, the numbers might not look as good as, say, an older property with equivalent rents. But what you're forgetting is that you're not putting as much time, effort, and money down the road to deal with issues. So it might not look as good up front, but down the road, it is a better investment for the most part in terms of time and money spent. It is more money up front. It's a new build. So you're typically paying a little bit more upfront because you're not putting in, there's no room for sweat equity, stuff like that. It can be difficult to negotiate pricing, unlike unlike with a builder, or sorry, unlike with a seller who might be motivated to sell due to personal reasons. Builders are multi-million-dollar companies that don't really care what you want. Unless typically you're working with the sales manager, and typically if you can have a good relationship with the sales manager, that's really where your in is, because they still want to make a sale. So that's a personal touch. You're dealing with, as a corporation, you're dealing with management, middle managers, higher managers that don't really have motivation to sell you a product at a lower price when they know the next person coming around will just buy it at asking value. So, but if you can build up a good relationship with the sales manager, you might still be able to negotiate a good deal. Or what I've done in the past is I've brought in other investors to, if it's a good deal, bring in other investors, have a bulk buy, and then that can maybe get you a better deal with management. So like I said, low potential for sweat and forced equity. Everything's brand new, so you can't really put more work into it. Some opportunity cost for the money, because you have to put up a deposit up front. So that deposit will sit there for a good 8 months to a year before the house is done. So that money just sitting there not doing much. So there is some lost opportunity cost there. A little potential for future development. So unlike buying an older house in an older neighborhood where you can knock it down and build an infill or a multifamily, typically when you build a brand new build, that is it. It's not going to be rezoned for decades. So what you have is what you get. And it's typically further from city centers, right? So again, less convenient. So you're typically targeting a different tenant profile. You're definitely not looking at people who need to take transit to get to work or anything. They have cars, they might work from home, might not mind the commute. They have young families who want a yard, they have a dog, pets who want a yard. So typically not a make or break. And there's additional setup costs in addition to buying the home. So typically when you buy a resale, you buy it. If it's good, you might have some little fixes, but then it's good to go. Whereas this one, once you're done, you got to pay for landscaping, get that done, pay for the fence, pay to build the garage. So a little bit of extra out costs after the fact as well. So final thoughts. The rules are good guidelines, someplace to get you started, but don't follow them. Don't take them as dogma. Always invest based on your preferences. And new builds don't always look good on paper, but is much less time consuming than older property to manage for the most part. And lastly, like I said, this is only one option, right? It's not I'm not trying to convince you that this is what you should always do. It's what I like to do because I don't like to work very hard. But but for those who want a custom legal turnkey income property out of the gate, this is a good option. So any questions from anyone? Feel free to unmute, throw it in the chat. I have a book as well, Real Estate Side Hustle for Investors. This can be found on Amazon. It does cover a lot of the fundamentals of how to get started in real estate investing, as well as how I developed my new build investing process as well. So if you want to go into a little bit more detail, how to build a tenant avatar, all those little things, this is a good good resource. And that's some info. So thanks, guys. Thanks for listening.
Awesome, buddy. So how do you work through with the builders to get the layout and design you want? Obviously, they've got so many different options that you can choose from. How do you narrow that down?
I mean, typically, you have to have a little bit of a background in knowing what makes a legal suite legal. So, having a secondary entrance, having large enough windows in the bedrooms for egress, having two heating systems. So the property itself, you have to look at. Typically, a lot of builders have a basement plan of some sort, if that's the type of legal suite you're going for. And you want to look at the basement plan and make sure there's enough room for all those things. Make sure there's enough room for a proper legal suite with a secondary entrance, with a second furnace, because that all takes up a little bit more room. And ideally, if you can have both parties be able to access the furnace room without entering each other's suites, that would be ideal. So a couple things to look at in terms of layout. Yeah.
And how have you found the strategy over the last couple of years, and more recently, how has it been?
It's been great. I mean, I think the more iterations I go through and the more builders I talk with, you kind of narrow down what you want and what you find. Although some builders, they can be a little bit harder to work with, and you have to manage them a little bit more, handhold them a little bit more, just because a lot of builders, you tell them what you want, but this is not typically what they do. So you have to be very succinct in what you tell the builders, because they're just used to building single family homes for homeowners. So adding all these secondary suites, adding all these criteria, kind of confuses them a little bit, because they're not familiar with the rules as familiar with the rules as you are, especially stuff like soundproofing. Like I cannot emphasize enough how important soundproofing is, and sometimes the builders don't. Their standards aren't as high as say mine, and they don't, the soundproofing may not be as good as you want. So you have to be very, very clear. Lately, I've been using my team of contractors, so I don't go through a builder to build the basement suite. I actually have the house built, and then I have a team of contractors that I've used in the past that I trust that I know will build it to kind of a standard that I want, with the soundproof it to a standard that I want. That way I don't run into issues, because sound is a huge, probably the #1 issue when it comes to secondary suites. So yes, a few things to do. And a really cool thing with building it this way as well, I forgot to mention in my presentation, is you can actually also separate the utilities. And you can only do that as a new build from the beginning if you have the permits from the city. So if you have a large house with 2 relatively large suites, and you don't want to, and you're not sure how much utilities each will use, and to charge a flat rate for, you can just charge the rent and have the tenants in each suite pay their own utilities, which is amazing.
And that's a really, really good point, because that also changes the cash flow calculation that you talked about earlier, the 8% rule. Because you might see the 8% for the gross rent calculation based on the purchase price, but if you have to factor in your own payment of utilities, that's going to dramatically affect your cash flow.
Totally, yeah. So I mean, I find that's good for properties that are 2,000 square feet and above, just because utility costs really start to balloon at that point. Anything below, it might be better just to keep it as a single, and then just kind of charge utilities, as a flat rate separately. And a nice thing about new builds too is the efficiency factor. Your utility costs are typically a lot lower than if you were to buy a similar home that's older, similar size home that's older, just because the materials they use, everything they use is so much more efficient nowadays than it was like 20 years ago, 10 years ago. So those costs are reduced as well. So you actually have higher rents and lower expenses when it comes to a new build nowadays, I find. So that just increases that cash flow potential a little bit better.
Yeah, and another good thing too, Phil, is that the new builds are built based on today's codes, where even though if you are working with an older property and you're able to get it grandfathered in certain municipalities, it becomes a conforming suite, but that does not necessarily mean it's up to the same building code or standard of a new constructed home today.
True. Oh, one more con. Builders now are moving more and more towards zero lot line lots, zero lot line houses. What that means is the house is right up against the property line of the next property, and you only have 4 feet or so between each house as opposed to your usual 8 feet that you had in previous older lots. So it makes accessibility for the secondary suites a little bit more difficult nowadays because you only have one side where you can build a door, or you can build in the back. But just something to keep in mind as well. And in the larger cities, typically in Edmonton, Calgary, in smaller towns, Lethbridge, Red Deer, they might not be moving towards zero lot lines quite yet, just because there's more room. But for higher density, zero lot lines is becoming more and more of a thing, just because they can fit an extra plot on every block, the developer, so then they can make more money. But it makes it a little bit more difficult to build stuff like this, and it makes it a little more difficult for parking as well, just because you have less frontage in front of your home. So a few things to keep in mind.
Awesome, buddy. Well, thanks very much for the rundown. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.